Hello, welcome back to the Momentum Podcast. This is Dr. Nathan Iverson and Pastor Soo Ji Alvarez with us today.
Hey, thanks for welcoming me, Dr. Nathan. Great to be here. Looking forward to chatting a little bit today during this whole COVID pandemic. It's nice to have somebody else to talk to.
Agreed. This has been one of the highlights of my day for sure. So, and the Momentum Podcast, we love to ask difficult questions about leadership, work, life, to build momentum in our lives and others. So there's so many ways I look up to you, Pastor Soo Ji, as my pastor, you and Pastor Joe in our church. I love your co-leadership model. You're a deep thinker. You're as a woman in leadership. I think that's such a great model for so many in our community. And you lead in this grounded, empowered, centered self. I so appreciate that. There's many different ways, right, that when none of us are just one label or one thing. You're a mom, a wife, a leader, a community member. You happen to be Asian American. And this is a unique time to be Asian American in the United States.
It is.
So there's so many things I think we can learn from you and discuss today. I'd love to ask you on the different things that are happening in your life in the world. Where would you like to start?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for all of that. I didn't realize how amazing I was until you said all of those things. But yeah, I guess it might be great to maybe just start with a quick snapshot of who I am. You're right. I'm Korean Canadian. I was born in South Korea. As a family, we immigrated to Canada, so that's where I was raised. I moved down to Washington State to go to college, married my husband, who's Mexican-American, and so we consider our kids, we have two kids, a boy and a girl, and we call them Mexarian, because they have the privilege of having both a Mexican heritage and a Korean heritage as part of their cultural mix. And so it's a spicy mix. It's a little bit of kimchi, a little bit of jalapeno, throw in some tapatio sauce.
Some of the best foods.
Yes, but we definitely have enjoyed doing life together. And we're down here in Riverside, California, and that's one of the things we love about Southern California is just the rich diversity and the representation that we see, and just the integration that we see also of different people and different backgrounds and cultures and socioeconomic class. And so we love what we do. We pastor a church here in Riverside, and we co-pastor. And so that's different as well for me being a woman pastor in some tribes. That's not maybe something that people are used to. Yeah. And so that's been a lot of fun doing that here and kind of breaking stereotypes and the mold that way. And so we're just doing life, and that's kind of who I am.
I love it. That's so cool that like a Canadian American and Korean Mexican, so many different mixes in your family.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of Asians and a lot of Mexicans down here, and it's been so good to just feel like my kids are being raised alongside friends that kind of look like them. And I don't think that my husband and I had that, privilege all the time growing up as well. And at the same time, I'm hearing the stories and I'm reading the news, and I'm seeing a lot of the hate crimes that are happening, especially against the Asian Americans here in our country. And it's really heartbreaking. And it reminds me back to World War II and of the times when a lot of our Japanese Americans were, taken in. And so there's just a sadness that just happens in my heart to see that for my people. Yeah. And so, at the same time, I have yet to experience that level of attack personally on me because we're sheltered in place. And so I have not really been, out much. And so I don't know what the world holds for me and for my children when we are able to re-enter society again and fully engage in all the things that we were able to do before. It's scary times.
How do you, I would never describe you as someone who lives in fear. So it's scary times. And I appreciate that. You're not like roses and rainbows saying, well, it's great. I trust in God. You're saying, no, it's actually scary. And
it is.
My family particularly has reason to be concerned.
It is. And so that's something that we don't want to live in our bubble, and I do read the stories. I mean, it's egregious to hear the stories about, a 2-year-old getting stabbed because her family is Asian.
Oh my God.
By another young Latino male because he was convinced that they were spreading the coronavirus. And so here's a false narrative that somebody has bought into. And as a result of the fear and of the pandemic and of the different brokenness in our society already, we're seeing different people act out in those ways. It's just heartbreaking. And so, we don't want to live in our bubble and just ignore what's happening in the world and the injustices that are happening. And so I'm really thankful to be part of a tribe. Our Free Methodist denomination has been very vocal about standing out against racism. Historically, we've been abolitionists. We've stood out against slavery. And even in this season, we've been writing up a statement and supporting the Asian collaborative movement. And so we've been writing up our own statement as a Free Methodist denomination to make it very clear that we believe that racism of any type, especially the anti-Asian racism that's been arising, is not in line with the gospel. And people need to hear that, unfortunately, because there are people that believe that it is in line with the gospel, and it's clearly not.
Wow. Do you want to unpack that a little further?
I would love to. Yeah. So for me as a Korean Canadian living here in Southern California, it's a great place to blend in. I mean, I look like, anybody else. The times that I do stick out are within the walls of the church. Wow. There's not too many Korean women pastors out there. And if there are, they're usually in Korean churches and they're maybe in Buddhist monasteries.
Right.
That's one of the questions I get when I tell people that I'm a pastor. Because I'm an Asian woman, they ask me, of a Christian church? And I'm like, well, yeah. And so I think because I'm Asian, that they think I'm Buddhist, in that I pastor a Buddhist church. I don't know. And it's been especially difficult, even doing hospital visits when I go by myself. If I was an older white man visiting one of my parishioners who's an older white woman, I would have no problem getting in to visit her. But because I'm young, I'm Asian, and I'm a woman, the nurses look at me like, "You're who?" I'm like, "I'm her pastor. I'm here to visit her." And they're like, "Huh?" There's just a whole paradigm shift that hasn't happened in people's minds because of the way that I look, or my age, or my ethnicity. And so those are just some of the things that I can think of that I've experienced where people are biased. But yet, honestly, I can't complain. None of those things are as egregious as the attacks and the bias and the racism and discrimination that some of my darker sisters and brothers have experienced in their life and historically. But now in this season, I can finally feel like I'm justified to complaining a little bit because we're seeing actual, and we've seen it historically, but we're seeing now in this society, in this day and age, actual anti-racism happening in hate crimes, and we're seeing news stories about it. So I feel now as my polite, mild-mannered Asianness is wearing off, that I can now be like, no, that's not okay. Like we've got to take a stand for that. So some of the things that we are supporting through the Asian American Christian Collaborative, here are some of the ways that we are encouraging people to continue to demonstrate that anti-Asian racism doesn't align with the gospel. So engaging in whole life discipleship in churches and teaching on the works of Jesus, and combating against racism from the pulpit and in congregational life and in the world. increasing awareness and education on Asian American issues. We have issues too. We're sometimes seen as the model minority because people assume that we're highly educated, that we make money, that we're not discriminated against. And so it's sometimes hard to advocate for our people when there is this almost opposite bias that we don't experience suffering. And so this anti-Asian bias that we're experiencing now and the oppression and in the different things, we've got to continue to raise awareness that we do have issues related to our race and our culture. Providing culturally competent mental health services and resources, supporting Asian businesses. I encourage you guys, once you're able to go out to restaurants, go eat at a Thai restaurant or Vietnamese or
get it
Chinese,
to go today.
or get it to go today. Right. Just know that the coronavirus does not discriminate. It's in every restaurant. It's not just in the Asian restaurants. And then, really making sure that we are holding our elected officials accountable when we see them saying things that are harmful and that are harmful rhetoric towards people in our community. And so what are those things that we're seeing in this day and age? It's sad to say that we are seeing this on a national basis, and I'm not getting political here. I'm not telling you to vote for whoever. I really don't care who you vote for. But to recognize that we can't continue to look to our political leaders to set the tone and the narrative, that we have to, as voters, hold our leaders accountable when we see them and hear them expressing rhetoric that is harmful to any one of our community members, and that lines up with the gospel.
And that even applies at the local level as well, right? That's probably where we can have the most impact is our city, county leaders, and consider how are we advocating, standing with and beside people of any category who might be oppressed, discriminated.
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. So you shared all of that reality, that maybe shifting reality for many who are Asian in the U.S. and for your family. For many, this is a time that there's justified reason for fear, anxiety, in addition to probably loneliness and depression as a result of being socially isolated. I'd love to hear some of your perspectives on that current state of things.
Yeah. And I really do. And because we have kids at home, our kids are 10 and 12, and they're growing up in a healthy, stable household. And so they're not experiencing some of the, anxiety and depression that some kids their age are experiencing. It's sad to see how young this mental health crisis begins.
Yes.
And it points once again to the brokenness of our society, of our families, of people that are, hurting and bleeding. And so, when I think about how we are in this crisis, and I know that there are families that are struggling, that there are young adults and there are kids and there are seniors, that are struggling with the isolation and the depression and just the feelings that come up. And so I really do believe that there is in the season that we've got to speak hope into those situations. And I think for me, I've never been a person that has been overly worried about things I can't control. So that's one of the first things is we cannot continue to worry about things that are outside of our control. But we can change the way that we respond. And so, we can't control what happens at our job if we are cut down to part-time or let go. We can't control how long it takes to get our stimulus check or to get unemployment, right? There are so many things outside of our control. We can't, control what happens with our kids' schoolwork. And I would say for me as an Asian tiger mom, that's probably the thing I most want to control. I don't know if you know what Asian tiger moms are, but they're very overly involved in their children's education because it's highly important to them that their children do well and succeed academically. And when we go to all of our kids' honor roll awards, we're waiting for our trophy. I'm waiting for my Asian tiger mom trophy. I don't know when they're going to give those out one year. And so this whole stay at home and learn from home distance learning where they're doing their Zoom calls and they're reading a book together, that can be a little stressful for me because I'm academically oriented and achievement oriented. And I don't know if you've heard do you know what the Asian F is?
No.
That would be the American B. So if my child comes home with a B on their report card, that's the Asian F. And
how about like an A minus?
A minus can also be an Asian F.
Oh my goodness.
So there are certain things that I kind of default towards and focus my attentions on. And in this season, I can't do that. It's outside of my control. We're all in the same boat. My children are not hurting because they're not in school. It's for their own safety that they're learning from home. Yeah. And so it's one of those things where I just can't fixate upon those things that I can't control, but yet I've got to focus on my response during this time. And during this time, I'm choosing to respond with thankfulness. And that's one of the things that has been my word for this year is to be thankful for these times and to not view this time as a curse, but to choose to see it as a blessing for what it is and to be thankful for just those simple things that we are home together, that we are safe and healthy, that we are able to continue to provide and bring our kids with us when we have to go into work and go to meetings and do different things.
That's so good. You talked about gratitude and thankfulness. That's definitely not the default. Probably any day, but particularly during this season, it's not our default when we turn on the news or we walk outside and are stimulated by so much of what isn't, that we can make a whole list of how the world is different and how it isn't what we would normally pursue or perceive as good.
Yes.
How do you choose gratefulness in this season?
Yeah. Well, it is hard to do. We've got to choose gratefulness by opening up our eyes to those things that are invisible, but that are right in front of us. So something as simple as eating a meal together, being thankful because there's food on the table. Something as simple as watching a sunset going down, as hearing the birds singing outside. Those are all gifts and things that we can be thankful for. And I feel like in this season, we're especially poised to slow down and to notice those things. Because before we were on autopilot, we were so busy in our routine, getting the kids up, rushing them to school, getting ourselves to work, getting things done throughout the day, getting, kids home. And so there's just a lack of awareness that happens in our doing. And so in this season where we're doing less and learning how to be more, I feel like we've been given this opportunity to notice those things that are given to us as gifts, that are gifts that God has given for us to delight in. And so whether that's the laughter of a child, whether that's rain that comes on certain days and sun that comes on other days and heat that comes when we need it, choosing to be thankful for those things. Just a moment ago, we had to stop our recording because the gardener came and started weed whacking and blowing and mowing. And so being thankful that there's somebody that is cutting my grass for me on this hot day. Those are all things that we can choose to either be upset about or choose to view as a blessing, as a gift, and to be thankful for that and recognize that this is our life that we are being thankful for. That this is a choice that we have to fully embrace our life and see it as a gift in each one of those moments, or we're just going to completely miss it. We're going to completely miss it and not even know where it all went one day.
I appreciate that. Living in the present. There's so many, I think it's so easy to have a year or two go by, And then all of a sudden, we're like, what happened?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know. And I think we live by milestones. And so or maybe I do because I'm goal oriented. And so, it's good to have dreams and visions and goals, but it's the journey that gets us there that we've got to also learn to enjoy instead of the end goal. And so I think sometimes we believe that lie that we will be happy when this happens, when our careers take off, when we buy the perfect house that is the perfect size for our family, when we're able to, find the perfect person who is going to be our soulmate and fulfill us for the rest of our lives. And so we kind of put all of our hopes and dreams into these, big ambitions, and then we become ungrateful for the life that we're living now. And what happens when we get to those moments is we find that we're still unhappy and ungrateful. And so recognizing that it's more this perception, this attitude of the heart. And, I'm reminded that even Adam and Eve, who were created perfect in a perfect world and fully provided with everything they needed, their original sin was ingratitude because they believed that by eating of that fruit that they could live a fuller life and experience more. And that was the lie that the devil, told them and that they believed. And so this sin of ingratitude, I think, is something that we have to continue to fight against even today, and to recognize that that is what will rob you of your joy, and will continue to blind you to the fullness of life that God has for you right now, wherever you're at.
I appreciate that you're a high achieving person, yet you're very goal oriented. And for people that are very goal oriented and see sometimes like, okay, I want to get here, I want to get there, I want to get this check mark, this degree, this title. It's easy to not live in gratitude and say, once I make this amount of money, once I have this relationship status, this kind of home, this car, the list continues.
Yeah.
This new electronic, this new phone, then I will be happy.
Yeah.
How do you be both goal-oriented and high-achieving and grateful in every season?
That's a great question. Yeah, you're right. And that's definitely, I'm more task oriented. And so God has been working on me to learn to be more relationship focused and more people oriented. Because I can easily, in my unhealth, because I'm an achiever, I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, become that person that focuses on tasks and on goals and on deadlines and finds fulfillment and significance in those. And then at the end of the day, if I've neglected those people around me, and if I've chosen to not see them as important, then once again, that only hurts myself and my life. And so I think this whole idea of wholeness, of integration, is once again this idea of looking at each part of your life, every relationship, everything that happens, every activity, every commitment, everything you do, everything you say, and recognizing that there is an integration that needs to happen and a wholeness that needs to happen in order for those of us that are kind of more goal-oriented to recognize that we're going to miss all of those other steps in those relationships, and we're going to miss the journey to those goals if we're not careful. It's good to have goals. Without goals, if you don't have a plan, you're not going to get anywhere, right? If I want to get up to the mountain, I got to figure out a pathway to get there. And I mean, I can see the mountain and I could try to figure it out, but it's a lot easier if you actually look at the map and figure out what highways you're going to take to get there, because there's many options, right? And so there's sometimes people have this false idea, well, if it's meant to happen, it'll happen. And I don't have to do anything. And if it's God, then it'll happen. And I disagree with that. There are things that God has for us to do that we have got to do our part. And so we have to do our part or we're going to miss the boat on that. But along the journey, you've got to make sure that you're also recognizing all the other things that are already before us and making sure that those are just as important, if not more, and to know that they're there as an anchor for us. they're there to help us along the way. And so I continue to find strength and just centeredness in God, in my family, in my community, and to once again remember that people are more important than that degree or that career or that boat or that house or whatever those things are that we, have believed are what is going to make us happy and successful.
That's powerful. In Spanish, you might be familiar with the phrase that si Dios quieres, like if God desires it, and then it's a little bit of a hands-off phrase, as it commonly said in Latin America. Si Dios quieres, like nos vemos si Dios quieres, like we'll see you tomorrow if God wills it. And there's some spiritual truth in that, but then there's also this element of, well, if God wills it, like I'll get married si Dios quieres, or like I'll go to college si Dios quiere, like I will be happy today, si Dios quiere. Like, how do we balance that? Because yes, God is powerful and in control, and at the same time, how do we not be victims and feed into this victim mindset? And there's different phrases across cultures. That's just one that comes to mind. How do we walk that to trust God as powerful and to trust ourselves as in control and with the authority that he has given us?
Yeah. Well, I think the answer really lies in the image of God, the Imago Dei, recognizing that he created us to demonstrate his nature, his goodness, his personality. He's given us our emotions, our abilities, our creativity. And this whole time, he invites us to be active partners with him. Yes, there's things that only he can do because he is God. And yes, there's things that we can't control. And so when life doesn't go the way that we want it, be thankful and know that God knows better the plans for your life. But to know that there is a part for us to obey and be obedient and to step out in faith. And I believe that's part of the faith journey. I believe that if your journey with God has been easy, then there's something wrong. That there's an element of courage and bravery that comes with walking by faith, which usually involves being able to see the next step, but not always being able to see to the end of the road. And so what does it mean to be obedient when you're not sure if you're doing exactly God's will? What happens if you become paralyzed and you decide, I am not going to do anything until God clearly shows me with a neon sign that this is what he wants me to do. And sometimes we pray that way. I feel like I prayed that way before I married Joe. I was like, God, I want to make sure this is the right man for me. So give me a bright neon sign.
Yes.
And we have to recognize that, sometimes he gives us a burning bush, but not every time does he do that. And because he's wanting us to trust him. And so that there's this element of faith where we're not sure, but we're going to do our part and we're going to step out and do the best that we can with our ability. And so I think that there's that part that people need to realize is that it's an active instead of a passive relationship with God, that our faith in God is not this passive, let me sit back and let him do it all. It's definitely active. We've got to be able to initiate and to step out in faith and to prayerfully to put ourselves and insert ourselves in those positions and in those places, and to recognize that God is the one that is preparing that way for you and doing that for you, so that he is directing our steps at the same time. And sometimes we get off course, but God is always faithful to correct us and redirect us back to him. And so I think that that's the struggle that we face sometimes. How do I know if this is God's will? Am I doing this right? Do I take this job or do I take that job? Do I, and so there's this continual battle. And I think that that's part of faith. We will not know exactly how to do it all right, but that doesn't give us the excuse to never do anything.
There's when I was choosing universities in high school, right, thinking about where to go, and I had this idea of that God had this perfect will for my life, and it was one singular path, and all I could do is mess it up. His destiny for me was perfect, and the only role I could play is possibly mess it up. And I had many sleepless nights worrying about that I would choose the wrong school, choose the wrong location, because it's all this fear orientation.
Right.
A big shift for me has been changing that language to what if I can't mess up? Mm-hmm. What if God is so endlessly for me that it's impossible to fail? Mm-hmm. As Nelson Mandela said, I either win or learn, I never lose.
Right. That is so good. You're right. I think we've got to get out of this mindset that there is one perfect way, or that the perfect way, which in our minds involves no failure, is what God has for us. No, I mean, it's hardly ever a perfect straight path to get from point A to point B, because we don't learn that way.
No.
We don't.
Those are boring people. If you have a straight path, those are boring people. They're like, tell me about a time you struggled with ABC.
Right.
Well, no, never.
Right. That is. And I think that somehow we think that the Christian walk is supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be, this perfect path that just leads us to the cross. And even the path that Jesus walked, it was not a straight path. I mean, it was definitely, there were a lot of bumps in his journey. And so for us to recognize that, you've got to go to God in prayer. You've got to let him speak into your life and to give you wisdom and discernment and to depend upon others as well. But at the same time, you've got to step out in faith and to know that he will not fail you, whichever college, university that you are destined to be at, to know that once you choose, that is your destiny. Once you choose the person you're going to marry and you make that covenant before God, that person is your destiny. And so this idea that we're going to make a mistake and choose the wrong career or the wrong spouse or the wrong house or the wrong city to move to, we've got to get over that fear and over that lie and know that as long as we are going to the Lord, that he is faithful to correct us and he closes the doors that are wrong. I mean, look at what he did to Jonah. He basically swallowed him up in the belly of a great fish because Jonah was going the opposite direction of where the Lord wanted him to go. And so don't be Jonah. Don't be that reluctant prophet.
He got pretty famous through that.
That's true. You're right. He did. And now we have a story that we can learn from.
So his mistake was the greatest part of his story.
It was. You're right.
We don't talk about how he spoke to Nineveh and like thousands turned. That's not why we barely remember the greatest, quote, greatest part of his achievement.
Right.
We remember his failure.
Yes.
And that's why he's famous.
That is why you're right. And that, that has become his marker. And that, I've always felt kind of like a reluctant prophet. And by that, I mean, when God clearly tells me something, there's always a part of me that wants to rebel. And I think that's in all of us.
To run to the sea.
There is. And so I've been challenging myself to learn to respond to God by obeying right away. And to obey God by responding right away. Because I don't want to be like Jonah. I don't want to get caught up in the belly of a whale.
You could have some great story about it.
You could. And you're right. I mean, either way, God's will is going to be accomplished. And so, so I've been, wanting to make sure that I'm not grudgingly doing the will of the Lord. And sometimes I don't ask him what his will is because of that. Because once you know, then you got to do it. So maybe it's better to not know and just pretend like I didn't hear you, God. Having those days as well. But to recognize that, no, I've got to learn to obey by responding right away. No matter how silly or how random it seems like God is speaking to me about something. And so learning to do that, whether that's something as simple as praying for somebody, if God lays somebody on my heart, or giving them a phone call, whether that's changing the route that I'm walking or that I'm running, because I feel like for some reason that God is leading me down this street instead of that street. You know what? Those may seem silly and those might not even end up in anything, but just tuning my heart into the Spirit of the Lord and learning to respond right away is something that is new for me.
I appreciate that. And I think I grew up in similar religious atmospheres. There's a lot of emphasis on listening to God and that God is speaking to you today. And for me, that honestly resulted in a little bit of neuroticism that I was so like, okay, if God says I need to go to McDonald's, I go to McDonald's. Like, he said order a double, go to In-N-Out and get a double, and I got a single. Oh no. Like literally, I was to the point of like at Best Buy one time, and I felt like I needed to go down an aisle and like say, can I pray for someone? I went down another aisle, and I lived in regret for like weeks in high school. And it was just this like clear cut, this path is right, this path is wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe God was telling me that, but for me, it was this neurotic, like listening to voices in my head kind of, and maybe it was God, maybe it was indigestion. How do we be faithful to what we think God is sharing in our life, but not move to this point of being psychotic?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. That's a tough one. When I see God's nature, he's got a sense of humor. He's very creative. The things that different people in the Bible did and that God did and that Moses did and that Jesus did, they're supernatural. They're out of the ordinary. And so, when God speaks to us, sometimes it doesn't make sense to our human minds. And so, I think for me, because I'm more analytical, I'm like, well, that's unreasonable. I don't know if that's right or not. And we have to get to this place where we are tuned in to the voice of the Lord and recognize that if it's good, if it bears the fruits of the Spirit, if it sounds too good to be true, if it's life-building, encouraging, if it's all of those things, then it's probably from God.
Okay.
And if it's negative, if it's condemning, if it's berating, if it's that type of a voice, then it's probably not from God.
So if someone's, you're like, hey, I feel like God told me that you need to have different earrings on. Like that's maybe not God's voice in your life.
Yes.
To criticize.
Does God care what kind of earrings I wear? I don't really know. He's never told me about that. But you're right. And I've had times like that where people have come up to me with a word from the Lord.
That it's like, this is not life-giving.
Right. It's definitely that, okay, let's just blow the chaff. Let's blow that
After
away.
you preach a message and someone's like, you did the altar call at the wrong time.
Yes. Yeah. And so it's one of those things. And I don't want to, I think that there is, in this time, there is a season for the prophetic voice of the Lord to speak through his people, his children, his elders, his men and his women. And so I know that there's times where I have felt impressed to say something, not sure if it was the Lord or not. And so when I am in that situation, instead of saying, God told me this.
This authoritative, like I hold the voice of God. Yeah.
Right. I'll more present it as, here's something that God has laid on my heart. I don't know if it's for you or for me or for somebody else.
I appreciate that. It's in humility.
It is. But I felt like I wanted to share that with you. So maybe you could be praying for me or praying about that. So presenting it that way, very open-handed. Maybe that person will be like, wow, that's exactly what I needed to hear because I'm going through this. Or maybe they'll be like, okay. And they've moved on with their life. And to recognize that, we don't know. And honestly, it's not up to us how that person responds, but to present it with humility. Yeah. And once again, for me, I'm learning to be obedient. Because if it is the voice of the Lord and I didn't respond, I don't know, and so let's not live in that type of regret. Let's just humbly respond to the Lord and allow him to, to take credit for the results.
But it sounds like you're also responding to this in humility. You're not jamming it down people's throats and saying like, receive the word of the Lord.
Right. And so it's funny. I think one time I had somebody say that I was going to marry a man named John, And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know any Johns, but I'll go look for them now. And recognizing, no, they were off. I didn't marry a guy named John. I married a guy named Joe. Maybe they were similar. Maybe she heard Joe and interpreted John. It doesn't matter. But to recognize that, I think that we sometimes think being prophetic means being a fortune teller and telling, the future. No, that's not what that means.
Sometimes we see God as a fortune teller.
Right.
Instead of this good father that wants to walk beside us. No, he's like a magician that is sneaky and behind the scenes, pulling levers.
Like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain.
Often, I think that's my fault too, is seeing God as this magician, this Wizard of Oz that's sneaky.
Right. And so, it's once again, it's like, no, this prophetic voice is just being a mouthpiece for God. And maybe that's something as simple as smiling and saying hi to somebody in the store that needed that encouragement in that moment. And so, just trying to be obedient to the nudge of the Holy Spirit, and recognizing that sometimes it leads to nothing and sometimes it leads to foolishness. And if it leads to something greater, then praise be to God for that and give him the glory and the credit for that.
We've covered a lot of things today, from coronavirus to being Asian in North America, and a walk at fear and depression, anxiety, and being faithful to the Lord in your life. As we close up, what are some summative thoughts that you have?
As we close, I think just once again, for me, this gratitude that I've been living in has definitely helped ground me. And this is speaking from a person that can be very ungrateful. And so, recognizing that for Jesus, on the night that he was betrayed, as he was giving thanks for the bread and for the juice, knowing that it was a symbol of his body, which was to be given and broken, and of his blood, which was going to be spilt and poured out for the forgiveness of sins, that there's a thankfulness that comes even in times of pain and of trial. And that it's this idea that we're not just thankful in times of plenty, in times of celebration, in times of good times, that we can learn to be thankful in times that are painful, and learn to understand that there are gifts that are wrapped up in pain. And when we can learn to unwrap those gifts and see them as a gift instead of as a curse, that's when we'll start to understand this abundance of life that God wants us to live in. So I just want to encourage any one of you out there with that today to know that wherever you're at, whatever the gift looks like in front of you, I encourage you to take time to unwrap it, as painful as it might be, and to recognize that buried in there, that there is a gift somewhere in there for you that God has perfectly picked out and given to you today.
Wow. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today, Pastor Soo Ji.
You're welcome.
And we'll look forward to being in touch. I think our listeners will really gain a lot from today's episode. There's unique and practical applications that each person can take, from gratitude to maybe identifying with people and hearing some stories of people who might be different, right? Like who might have a different experience, and saying, wow, their reality is real. How can I encourage and edify, stand beside, in this case, people that are Asian across the world that might be experiencing discrimination?
Thanks so much for inviting me, Dr. Nathan. It's been really fun.
Awesome. So this is the Momentum Podcast. Dr. Nathan Iverson and Pastor Soo Ji Alvarez signing off.